Yes, Cookie, I know I should be promoting my Patreon more now that I'm laid off from my law firm, but I just can't deal with that extra rejection. Oh, hey, everybody. Welcome to JL's Book Club, where we don't talk about Fight Club because I didn't read Fight Club. Now, I'm trying to keep my chin up because my fitness has gotten really bad. You can probably go back and watch from the beginning of these videos. You'll see a jawline slowly disappear into just a mess of shoulder injury, special fuck-up induced depression, and it all stores right here. So it's kind of like when Matthew Perry was not on cocaine. He turned into a fat fuck. But when he was on cocaine, it was like, hey, you look good. Oh, but apparently it was not good for you. So who knows? Obviously, before we get into this week's, this month, I always say this week's. I'm so ambitious about my reading schedule. This month's book review. We have a beverage of the week, and I rummaged through the fridge and saw one that is not mine, but it's from Mocktail Club. Bombay Fire, premium crafted non-alcoholic cocktails. That's where we are, people. We are selling non-alcoholic cocktails. And Bombay Fire, obviously a tribute to the future of India's climate change-induced weather. So look forward to that. Call back. Ministry of the Future. Remember that book, if you give a shit, that I reviewed maybe a year ago. I don't remember. It's all blending together into a slow yet quick march to the grave. But that book began with a climate change disaster in India that killed 20 million people. So on that happy note, why don't we get to this week's month's book review? And this one took me about 5.5 weeks. So I beat 8.5 weeks, the movie. I think that movie was about reading a long book as well. But it took me 5.5 weeks to read this, which is why the review's coming in end of the month. It's the end of the month. You're like, what is he talking about? That's a Bone Thugs and Harmony. I feel like, just sidebar before we get to the book. I think, because I know most of you don't even watch this, so just the few that do watch this will appreciate this. I actually think at this point, one of the main flaws in my comedy career is knowledge and reading and becoming an adult before the internet, where breadth of knowledge and memory were sort of valued commodities in social spaces. And now we are just in intellectually bankrupt silos where you just have to know your audience and your niche, and that's it. And if you branch out from that, you confuse people, you frighten people. So I assume if my comedy career continues on this trajectory, I'll either be homeless or burned at the stake, depending on how badly we go as a society. But anyway, guys, this month's book, and this is a little nepotism warning. It was written by Brad Snyder, who is now a professor at Georgetown Law. I did not have him while there. I did have Professor Neil Katyal, a talking head on MSNBC, very famous lawyer. Great bit on Half Blackface about Neil Katyal. Really excited for that to come out this year. August 25th appears to be the album release date. No word on the special. The only thing I can guarantee you is I won't be making much money. But my brother, a good friend of my brother, wrote this book. He also wrote Well-Paid Slave, which was about Curt Flood, the baseball player who basically created free agency or led to free agency in baseball. So a very hugely influential legal and sports figure, Curt Flood. But this book is called Democratic Justice: Felix Frankfurter, the Supreme Court, and the Making of the Liberal Establishment. And liberal establishment in this case means, liberal in terms of meaning liberal principles, not meaning woke. So, what I will say early on, now I want you to listen to this review, watch this review, because it'll be fun. But what I will say early on is that the first 120, 130 pages of the book, I don't want to say drag, but it's a 700, not counting index and references, it's a 712 page book, and tiny print, big pages. So this was a real epic reading effort by me. But fortunately I had very little work at my day job, so I was able to read more during the day. Of course, that backfired when earlier this week I was laid off after 4 years. So, pluses and minuses. Able to crank out a good book review for you guys this month. Lost my job. So, it balances out in the end, I'm sure. Obviously, though, to make up for that, I'd appreciate at least 5 million views for this book review, because that should probably get me like 2 months out. Okay, anyway. I want to say it drags. It's very heavy in terms of like his biography, and then once he kind of enters Harvard Law School, and you sort of, but then I started to sort of appreciate like this is somebody who was such a pivotal historical figure both on the court and before his time on the court, that I think there was a need to sort of include a lot of these details. But I will just as a warning, the first 100 to 150 pages, I was kind of like, I hope this picks up. And then it does. Like once we get to him as influential wheel in government and Harvard law liaison extraordinaire onto the Supreme Court, it picks up. Now, I know I have several lawyers who are fans. I would recommend it. I can't, because of my deep training and love of the law, I can't remove my experience as a lawyer and as a law student from my brain, even though I've tried. So I don't know to a lay person, if they're reading this, if some things will be more difficult to grasp, whereas there are things that just come readily from having read lots of cases, studied law like that I don't, so I'm just as a warning. So to the lawyers out there, or the people very interested or steeped in law or whatever, I think it's a very good book and kind of an essential history book, as far as somebody with a incredibly unique, I don't know if I don't know enough to say singular, but a very unique story and centrality to sort of from the 1920s to the 1960s, like an incredibly important figure. By way of just brief introduction before I read you a couple passages, basically he's an immigrant. He comes to this country. That's what most immigrants do. And he goes to City College in New York, which was free, and a prestigious university for a long time. And if you've seen New York City subway ads for City College now, I like it because it's basically like, hey, do you like hot people of color? Well, we've got them at City College, and you don't have to pay a fucking dime. And I was like, hey, that seems pretty cool. Hot Asian chick and handsome black man. I don't have to pay anything, and I get to walk around campus with you guys? Cool. So he went to City College, then went to Harvard Law School, where he graduated top of his class. And like many things that happened, he was Jewish, and he was Jewish his whole life. He wasn't just Jewish when he graduated Harvard. He didn't get that with his Harvard diploma. You are now also Jewish. It's like a graduate degree bar mitzvah. They don't do that there. He had trouble finding work, but then had a mentor who basically got him into government work. And he became this huge champion for public service and really worked hard to guide brilliant people from Harvard, instead of into private sector, into clerkships and government work. And that's sort of, I think the book sort of indicates, and I can't know this for sure, but it seems like he was very integral in terms of making Harvard this, like, it was of course an elite institution of learning, the elite university, but in terms of like guiding serious and intellectual heavyweights from the school, and especially from the law school, into public service, which is a very noble, good thing. So that was just like one piece of his contribution. He then became, he was like best buds with Franklin Roosevelt. And this is the one part, and I'm glad that Snyder, Professor Snyder, or can I call him Brad since he's friends with my brother? We'll keep it formal, Professor Snyder. He definitely did some shady shit with FDR. Like, not like the Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, money, pay for play kind of stuff, but he was just in on like policy discussions and advising on like laws and things with the New Deal. And I was like, is Professor Snyder going to point this out? And then the next page, he's like, this was my words, this was obviously highly fucked up. And it was one of those things where I was like, he was in some ways a contradiction, but his main focus pre-Supreme Court and on the Supreme Court, and he wasn't always right in my opinion, but he smarter guy than me, but he was focused on the legitimacy of the Supreme Court and the supremacy of of democracy in this country. Like, in other words, there were certain things where the court had to put its foot down, and but mostly it was not there to be, as they call it, a super legislature, to like be the supreme arbiters of what is and isn't law. He wanted democracy to carry the day, and he would have to point out in several opinions, sometimes it would be like, oh, this is a terrible law. I disagree with this law. Not my place to make law. My place is to say, is it constitutional? And if it is, and you don't like it, you've got to vote it out. Now, I don't want to get into too sticky, like there are certain subjects, like Robert Bork, famous justice in the 80s, was rejected, did not win confirmation. And part of that was his writings on Brown versus Board of Education, that he considered it bad law. But you have to understand, in the 50s, if you remove bigotry and racism from the conversation, there was a lot of debate over whether it was technically good law or not. Now, Frankfurter helped engineer that to be a 9-0 decision. And you can get all this from the book. I don't have to give you just a recitation of the entire book. But he basically was somebody who was like, only in certain cases, are like Brown versus Board of Education, and some of the racial segregation cases where he came firmly on the right side. But in a lot of cases, he would come down on what we might consider the wrong side, because he thought, we're not supposed to be doing this work. And I've said this when it comes to Trump and stuff like that, where I go, if America has shitty people, you're going to sometimes have shitty laws. It's not the Supreme Court's job in all cases to say, no, we disagree, we know what's right, even though we'd like them to do that sometimes. That was kind of his guiding principle when it came to the court. Just an incredibly impactful, influential person. So I've got 2 quick passages to read for you, and then I'll let you get on with your day. Early on, this is like when the book starts to turn for me, and I don't mean to insult, I'm just saying, this is not from a writing or research standpoint, but from a narrative standpoint. This is when, like, his beef with William Howard Taft, the fat president turned fat Supreme Court Chief Justice. He had beef with him. He thought he was like a cowardly president, and even though he was a good judge, not really a good Supreme Court justice. But here we go. Just a brief passage. I'll spare you the longer excerpt. Like in Mass, we'll omit the bracketed portion for the shorter reading. An unsigned New Republic editorial, likely written by Frankfurter, excoriated liberals who abhorred Taft as president, yet applauded his appointment as Chief Justice. He reminded them about Taft's laziness as president and submissiveness on the National War Labor Board. He criticized Taft for failing to speak out against the unconstitutional Palmer raids, as former Justice Charles Evan Hughes and Senator Albert J. Beveridge had. Though he conceded that Taft was a good judge, he warned progressives not to conflate Taft's judicial competence with judicial greatness. Unlike judges such as Benjamin Cardozo and Learned Hand, Taft had, quote, contributed practically nothing to legal thought. To quote Tupac in his rap beef with Biggie, and that's why I fucked your wife, you fat fuck. I'm paraphrasing. But that's what it felt like. This felt like a 1930s Pac big beef in terms of the Supreme Court. It was just little Tupac Frankfurter calling out that fat bitch Taft for let me just put, in 1930s speak, contributed practically nothing to legal thought. Them's his fighting words. So I enjoyed that, and that's sort of, I don't want to, like, I think I'm hammering the first part of the book too hard. It was just, for me, once I got into more familiar territory, it might have been me, just I started devouring it at a faster pace, maybe because the news of the day and all the significant events that he was part of started to, like, I don't know, rile me up or whatever. But I enjoyed that, and I apologize for the vulgarity if there were any kids sitting around, but I immediately tagged that passage when I hit it. I said, oh, this is like the Tupac hit 'em up version of Supreme Court Justice beef. And then the other one, just to show his sort of political acumen, Because that's the other thing. He really was. It's kind of a weird thing because he's this, on the one hand, he's this justice who has stayed mainly consistent throughout his like 50 plus years involved in the law about the role of the Supreme Court. And yet he was also doing highly questionable and unethical things in terms of his role as a justice, in terms of advising the president on laws that he may have to rule on later. Obviously that would cause you some bias. It's like, no, that seems constitutional. I wrote it with FDR. So it's definitely good in my book. But here's his thoughts on Richard Nixon around, like, when he was vice president for Eisenhower and maybe eyeing the presidency in '60, which of course he did, and he lost to Kennedy. The Supreme Court vacancy came nearly 2 months before the 1956 presidential election, a rematch between Eisenhower and Democratic nominee Adlai Stevenson. Frankfurter, who had been gossiping about the election for months, thought Eisenhower was a mediocre leader. This dude's spilling all the judicial tea. And Stevenson lacked the common touch. The clear favorite, Eisenhower, had spent the last year fending off questions about his health after suffering a heart attack. He also considered dropping his vice president, Richard Nixon, from the ticket. For his part, Frankfurter understood that the difficulty with Nixon was he had damn little anchorage in convictions. I suspect he is not without brains and power of assimilation, but is greedily ambitious and thinks almost anything is justifiable in political long warfare. Well, well, well. Looks like somebody nailed Nixon right on the nose 16 years before Watergate. Nice job, Felix. Called it. So maybe an author doesn't want to hear this because you want your book to be as broadly appreciated as possible, but it's impossible for me to read this book without having gone to law school and knowing some of these background things and kind of reading through constitutional law lingo. So I can't like take that out and go, how would I read this if I didn't know that or have experience with that? That said, I think it was a very good book. It's really long. If you get through, for me, once you get through the first 100 pages, which it may just be me, I think it starts to really, really speed up, even though it's very long. And I just found myself reading more and more pages each day versus like, I got through 12 pages, that was enough today. And then, then it became 30 and 40 a day. And by the way, these are long pages. So I definitely liked it. I think anybody who's either interested in law, legal history, or is a lawyer would enjoy this book, because I've always known the name Felix Frankfurter, but it's like this puts him in such a central role, both as a Supreme Court justice, but really a lot of his work before being a Supreme Court justice was huge in terms of kind of this Harvard pipeline that he sort of created, and his work with FDR. So a must-read for anybody interested in the law, legal history, or that's a lawyer, and an ambitious lay person, I think, could also enjoy this. So that's it. That's the review for this month. And it's heavy, so if you had to cancel your gym membership because you got laid off, you can just do reps like this, but not with your surgically repaired shoulder that's ruined your life. Anyway, guys, next month, now, this was supposed to be Nepotism month, a book by my brother's friend and a book by my brother's wife, but I've been a little slow just dealing with things like being laid off from work. Did I mention that already? But my sister-in-law's new book is out, The 272, cookie bookmark not included. And I'm halfway through it, enjoying it. When I say enjoying it, it's enjoyment is probably, that's like saying, did you see 12 Years a Slave? Loved it. No, it's good. Enjoyment might be the wrong word. But I will review this next month, along with a rare reread, which I may start doing. Oppenheimer. Now, I read this biography. My uncle, R.I.P., had wanted this book, and I bought it for him. It's like a 2005 hardcover, and I think it came out in like paperback in '06 maybe. This is the details you really want out of this. But my uncle had wanted it because it got great reviews, and I bought it for him, and then I said, you know what, I'm going to buy it for myself. And I remember it won the Pulitzer for biography back in '05, And I remember thinking, oh, I'd like to, like, yeah, this. I mean, he created the atomic bomb. This is an important person. And by the end of it, I just remember being like, that was a fucking slog. And my uncle actually kind of felt the same way, that it was just a very dense, like, whew. But Christopher Nolan's movie's coming out, and he used this as the basis for the script. So, well, probably omitted a lot of parts and put more special effects in the movie than are in the book. But I figured, you know what, with the movie coming out, before it comes out, I'll reread this so I can give you an update. So you're going to get a 272 review and a special books revisited, a new subsection of JL's book club. Wow. You guys didn't think you were going to get bonus content, did you? But you are. So that's next month, 272, Oppenheimer. Selling Slaves and Creating the Atomic Bomb. A joyful July indeed. So thank you for watching. Check out Democratic Justice, okay? And that's it. So remember, everybody, books, they're like documentaries for smart people.